Today is Saturday, July 25th, 2026, and today is National Day of the Cowboy. It's a day that celebrates the people who build their lives on hard work, wide open spaces, and the belief that the next horizon might hold something better. Oddly enough, that idea runs through every story today. One man headed north chasing gold and accidentally became one of America's greatest writers. Another ruled a nation for 2 decades before watching it all disappear in a single day. And one surprisingly simple invention changed the way millions of people got dressed every morning. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and your guide through the moments where humanity somehow became both impressive and ridiculous simultaneously. When people hear the name Jack London, they usually think of the Call of the Wild or White Fang. His stories feel so authentic because, in many ways, they were. On July 25, 1897, the 21-year-old London boarded a ship bound for Alaska, hoping to strike it rich in the Klondike gold rush. Like thousands of others, he wasn't chasing literature. He was chasing gold. The Klondike had exploded into an international sensation after reports spread that prospectors had discovered enormous gold deposits in Canada's Yukon Territory. Newspapers filled their front pages with stories of instant fortunes, and people from every walk of life quit their jobs, sold their possessions, and headed north. The reality was much harsher. The journey itself was brutal. Prospectors climbed the infamous Chilkoot Pass, carrying nearly a ton of supplies required by Canadian authorities. Bitter cold, dangerous terrain, disease, and exhaustion claimed countless dreams before anyone even reached the gold fields. London never found the fortune he was looking for. Instead, he contracted scurvy, struggled through one of the harshest winters of his life, and eventually returned home nearly broke. But he came back with something much more valuable. He had lived the stories. The frozen wilderness, the sled dogs, the desperate prospectors, the brutal struggle between civilization and survival. All of it became the foundation for the novels that would make him one of the most successful writers of his generation. Sometimes the thing we're chasing isn't nearly as valuable as what we discover along the way. While Jack London discovered that fortunes can disappear almost overnight, our next story is about a man who learned that power can disappear just as quickly. For more than 20 years, Benito Mussolini appeared almost untouchable. He had transformed Italy into the world's first fascist dictatorship, built an enormous propaganda machine around his image, and convinced many Italians that he alone could restore their nation's greatness. By the summer of 1943, reality had caught up with the rhetoric. Italy had suffered devastating military defeats during World War II. Allied forces had invaded Sicily. Cities had been bombed. Public confidence had collapsed. On January 25, 1943, members of Mussolini's own fascist Grand Council turned against him and voted to remove him from power. King Victor Emmanuel III summoned Mussolini to what he believed would be an ordinary meeting. Instead, the king informed him that his government was finished. As Mussolini left the palace, he wasn't greeted by cheering supporters. He was arrested. Just like that, the man who had dominated Italian politics for more than 2 decades found himself riding away in an ambulance under armed guard as a prisoner. It was one of history's sharpest reminders that even the most powerful leaders can discover that authority lasts only as long as people are willing to accept it. History is full of sweeping political changes and larger-than-life figures. Our last story proves that sometimes the biggest impact comes from something so ordinary, most of us never stop to think about it. Imagine getting dressed for work in the mid-1800s. If your shirt collar became dirty, and it almost certainly would, you couldn't just toss the shirt into the washing machine. Washing clothes was an all-day chore involving boiling water, scrubbing by hand, and hours of drying. Most people owned very few dress shirts, so keeping them looking clean wasn't easy. That's why on July 25, 1854, inventor Walter Hunt received a patent for the detachable paper shirt collar. At first glance, it doesn't sound like one of history's great inventions. A shirt collar? Really? But it solved a surprisingly expensive problem. The collar was the part of the shirt that became dirty the fastest because it constantly rubbed against a person's neck. Instead of laundering an entire shirt, people could simply replace the collar with a fresh one. Soon, businesses were manufacturing detachable collars in a variety of styles, allowing people to own several crisp white collars while wearing the same shirt underneath. For businessmen, lawyers, bankers, and professionals, it became an affordable way to look polished every day. Eventually, improvements in fabrics and home laundry made detachable collars obsolete. But for decades, they were a symbol of professionalism and respectability. It's another reminder that history isn't shaped only by presidents, generals, or famous inventors. Sometimes it's shaped by someone who notices a small everyday inconvenience and finds a clever solution. Not every historical figure becomes famous because of a book or an invention. Sometimes they become so woven into the country's story that their name ends up on maps, monuments, and even one of America's most famous military installations. Today's birthday belongs to Henry Knox, born on July 25, 1750. Before he became one of the most important military leaders of the American Revolution, Henry Knox owned a bookstore in Boston. He had a passion for history, military strategy, and engineering, often teaching himself by reading the very books he sold. When the Revolutionary War began, Knox joined the Patriot cause and quickly earned George Washington's confidence. His greatest achievement came during the winter of 1775 and 1776, when he organized the remarkable transport of nearly 60 captured British canyons from Fort Ticonderoga to Boston. Over more than 300 miles of frozen rivers, forests, and mountains, Knox and his men hauled their artillery through one of the harshest winters on record. Those cannons forced the British to evacuate Boston without a major battle, giving the Continental Army one of its earliest and most important victories. After the war, President George Washington appointed Knox as the nation's first Secretary of War, where he helped shape the young United States military. If Henry Knox's name sounds familiar, there's a good reason. Just a few episodes ago, we visited Fort Knox in one of our stories. That famous Army post and eventually the legendary Gold Vault is named in his honor. It's one of those little reminders that the more time you spend with history, the more all these stories begin to connect. And in today's episode, it's a great reminder that history rarely unfolds the way anyone expects. Jack London went north hoping to find gold and came back with stories that would make him famous. Mussolini spent years building what seemed like an unshakable dictatorship, only to see it collapse in a single afternoon. Walter Hunt solved what seemed like a small inconvenience, and his simple invention changed the way people dressed for generations. Even Henry Knox probably never imagined that centuries later, millions of Americans would recognize his name because of a military installation and one of the most secure vaults in the world. The paths that leave the greatest mark on history are often the ones no one sees coming. Anyway, one of my favorite parts about doing this show every day is discovering connections I never knew existed. A bookseller ends up lending his name to Fort Knox. A failed gold prospector becomes one of America's greatest writers. A simple shirt collar changes fashion for decades. The deeper you dig into history, the more it starts feeling like one giant conversation. And before I head out, here's today's historical quote that accidentally reveals how wonderfully weird humans are. This one comes from Mark Twain. Clothes make the man. Naked people have little or no influence on society. If you'd like to hear more of my work, narration, podcasts, or other projects, you can find it all at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and thanks for wandering through history with me for a while. I'll see you tomorrow.